Well, the sweep streak had to end sometime, right? And I guess if it was gonna end, it would take a pretty bad hitting slump, a couple of weird rain delays, including a suspended game, one of the worst defensive innings you'll ever see, and quite the base running blunder in the ninth inning of the final game. But it all happened, and the Orioles were swept by the Cardinals for the first time in 2 years. I'll break down what happened in the weird game and a half on Wednesday, coming up on this episode number 1000 of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, May 23rd, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, well, this is the episode I've kind of been, on one hand, dreading for a little bit, and on the other hand, very excited for a little bit as well, because the Orioles sweepless streak that's lasted over 2 years, that's been 106 consecutive series without getting swept, it is over as the St. Louis Cardinals completed a 3-game sweep over the Orioles on Wednesday. I'll get you what you need to know from the continuation of the suspended game, then the 5 things you need to know from the full game before finally, hopefully turning into a cheery mood. This is episode number 1000 that I have hosted of the Locked On Orioles podcast, and do a little retrospective on that at the end of today's show. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So it happened. It did. It felt like it might never happen, and yet it did. 106 consecutive regular season series of at least 2 games, the Orioles had not been swept. They'd brought it down to the wire multiple times, but every single time they'd find their way out. And they almost found their way out on Wednesday, but they couldn't do it as they continued their suspended game with a 3-1 loss to the Cardinals on Wednesday, and then followed it up with a 5-4 loss to St. Louis, combining it with the 6-3 loss on Monday night. And the Orioles have been swept for the first time since they were in Detroit in mid-May of 2022. It has been over 2 years, and Adley Rutschman swept at the big league level for the first time ever. So I'm going to start with the 3 things you need to know from the continuation of the suspended game that started at about 12:15 on Wednesday. If you go back and listen to Wednesday's episode, I had the 5 things you need to know from the 5.5 innings that were played on Tuesday night before the rain came in and they suspended the game. Now the 3 things you need to know on the conclusion of that game, in which the Orioles lost 3-1. Remember, it was 1-1 heading into the bottom of the 6th inning when they resumed the game. And the first thing you need to know is, I was at the time a little surprised the Orioles didn't go to Cole Irvin to begin kind of the restart of the suspended game. Irvin, who pitched 2 innings on Sunday, is currently working out of the bullpen, had 2 days of rest. And I thought, they got an entire game after this. You want to conserve the bullpen a little bit. This is a Cardinals lineup with a lot of lefties. I figure this was a spot for Irvin. And in a perfect world, he pitches 3 good innings. The Orioles take the lead. They go to Cano or Kimbrel in the 9th, and they win the game. However, Brandon Hyde decided to just go right into the back part of his bullpen, and it was Jacob Webb who came out there in the 6th. Now, it wasn't a terrible move. There was righty-lefty do up, and Webb got a couple of outs before walking the catcher Herrera with 2 down. But I just thought, and I saw, Irvin, they had announced the 4 starters for the series in Chicago this weekend. He wasn't slated to start any of the 4 games, which told me, okay, he is in the bullpen, at least for now. I figured that would be a spot for him. But as we're going to talk about later, there seemed to be actually a reason they did not go to Cole Irvin. They went to Webb. He gets the 2 outs. He walks the batter. And it seemed like they were going to go to a lefty anyway. And that was Keegan Akin, who came in with runner on first and 2 down in the 6th in a 1-1 game. And the second thing you need to know if they lost at the end of the suspended game Wednesday is that they just kind of went to Keegan Akin in the same role as Cole Irvin. Now, unfortunately, he gave up the 1 swing that was the difference in the game. The first batter he faced was the lefty Nolan Gorman, and on a 1-2 pitch, he tried to get a fastball to the outside corner. He missed on the inside part of the plate, and Gorman crushed it for what ended up being a go-ahead 2-run homer in the 6th inning off of Akin to put the Cardinals up 3-1. And that was unfortunate, but then Akin just kind of settled in and dominated the rest of the time. Like, yeah, does it stink that he gave up that homer? Yeah, and he took the loss in this game because of it, but that was the only base runner that he allowed. He ended up retiring the next 7 batters that he faced, giving the Orioles 2 1/3 innings of relief work, which was pretty important, knowing you had another 9-inning game coming up after that one. I thought Akin pitched well. I mean, he had a couple of strikeouts. He didn't walk anybody. It's just like he made that one bad pitch on the homer, ended up being the difference in the game. But otherwise, he kind of did exactly what the Orioles were going to ask Cole Irvin to do anyway. And it was just a solid outing. I mean, tough break, that you bring in Jacob Webb, who had been kind of bad lately, gets the couple of outs, then walks a batter, which you don't want him to do. And things just kind of spiraled in that 6th inning. But the third and final thing you need to know from the conclusion of game 1 on Wednesday is that the offense didn't give the Orioles much. Listen, they didn't give them much before the suspended game, had just 1 run in 6 innings against Lance Lynn. Of course, he was out of there. The Cardinals just went to their high leverage relievers. They went to Andrew Kittredge, who got 4 outs. They went to JoJo Romero to get 2 outs. And then the lockdown closer, Ryan Helsley, got them out of the 9th inning with Colton Cowser grounding into a double play. Now, Ryan Mountcastle did get a hit in the 7th, which was nice. He was 1 for 26 coming into that at-bat when he singled. And Jordan Westberg worked kind of a long at bat and drew a 1-out walk in the 9th to get the tying run at the plate. That was good to see as well. But Cowser bounced into the double play, and otherwise, the Orioles just kind of continued to be off at the plate during this entire series. And that's one of the big reasons that led to them being swept for the first time in 2 years. I don't want to really put a lot of blame on Keegan Akin. It was unfortunate he gave up the home run. Otherwise, he was dominant. The O's just couldn't score in this game, whether it was played Tuesday or Wednesday. They didn't do anything offensively, and they dropped the end of that suspended game 3-1. So that put them in a spot where their backs were against the wall again. Throughout this streak, the Orioles had been 14-0 in games in which they were about to be swept. They turned things around and won. Question was, could they do it again in the full 9-inning game that was played a little later on Wednesday? Fortunately, they could not. There was another rain delay. There were some wild errors. There was some crazy baseball, but the Orioles came out on the losing end. And coming up next, I'll tell you what happened and why this was the time for the Orioles' sweepless streak to end. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Now, Game Time has some great news because they are already the best place to get tickets, but now Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. And they've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. So Game Time, they take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And for me, it's pretty easy to just buy tickets to Orioles games. I have done it before where I have bought tickets just outside the stadium on my phone, on the Game Time app, and then the ticket gets sent right to your app. You don't have to dig through your email or your text messages to find it. Just right on the app, you get it scanned right there. You'll walk into the stadium, and when you're buying it at 6:20 for a 6:35 game, they've got those last minute deals. They've got flash deals. It's a pretty cheap ticket as well. Game Time is the place to go. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for all the Orioles games you want to attend. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Maybe you're looking at the Pacers and the Celtics tonight. Not sure how the Pacers blew that game one. Maybe they'll bounce back. How about a little Pacers money line for game 2? And you can do it at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So after the Orioles dropped the end of the suspended game earlier on Wednesday, they had a chance to once again avoid a sweep, but they could not do it, losing 5-4 in the full game on Wednesday in the series finale. And the Orioles are swept by the Cardinals, swept for the first time in the last 107 series, and swept for the first time since mid-May of 2022 in Detroit. More than 2 years since the Orioles had been swept, but it happened on Wednesday in St. Louis against not a great baseball team, 23-26. The Orioles now 29-18 on the year through 47 games. As I record right now, Orioles are 2.5 back of the Yankees, who have yet to play their game against the Mariners on Wednesday. But I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from that Orioles 5-4 loss to the Cardinals that ended the streak on Wednesday. And the first thing you need to know is John Means might not be okay. Now, as I record this, it is just after 6 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. I'm kind of looking for updates. It seems like we've gotten a small one so far. Here's a tweet from Danielle Allentuck of the Baltimore Banner after the media spoke with Brandon Hyde after the conclusion of the game. John Means had elbow discomfort, this according to Allentuck, and was going to be done after 3 innings, regardless if there was a delay or not. And that's not what you want to hear. Brandon Hyde's quote, this is from Matt Wayrich of the Baltimore Sun, quote, "That was disappointing, could tell a little something wasn't right and was trying to gut through it, but he did feel some elbow soreness and we're hoping for the best." So John Means, the reporting is he's going to get some testing done. We will see, but he just didn't look comfortable out there. Now, you couldn't completely tell if he was injured because, of course, just like Tuesday night's game, this game Wednesday went into a rain delay. After the top of the 4th inning, the Orioles were leading 3-0, went to the bottom of the 4th. There were crazy storms in the area. They put the tarp out. They went into a delay. And the delay took a while, long enough where neither starting pitcher was going to have any chance to return to the game. So our old friend Kyle Gibson was out, and John Means was out as well. But even when he was pitching, which was it's nice that even with the soreness, he did throw 3 scoreless innings for the Orioles. Even when he was pitching, you could tell something was not right. He gave him 3 innings, 1 hit, 1 strikeout, but he walked 2 batters on 51 pitches. John Means had not walked a batter all season since returning off the injured list until this game. Only 4 hit balls by the Cardinals against him, but the velocity was just way down. And it's not like John Means is throwing crazy hard. I mean, his average on the fastball this year is 91. He was averaging 88.9 miles per hour. He threw a chunk of fastballs at 88 in this game. That is not good. His hardest thrown fastball was 90.1 miles per hour. That is a concerning look, even for a guy like John Means, who doesn't throw very hard. When you're down more than 2 miles per hour on your average fastball, and the velocity was down across the board for all of his stuff by like 2 miles per hour, that is something to get a little concerned about. So we'll hope for the best for John Means, but remember, he had the Tommy John surgery, then he had the back issue that delayed him more, then he came back last year, made the 4 starts in September, then was shut down for more forearm and elbow soreness, didn't pitch in the postseason. That caused the Orioles to delay his comeback this year, which meant he missed the first month of the year building back up. And now he might be shut down again, depending on how he's feeling, what these tests show. That is not a good sign for the Orioles. He only got 2 whiffs. The stuff was not super crisp. He was kind of shaking things out a little bit in that 3rd inning. He was chatting with pitching coach Drew French after he came in, after the conclusion of the bottom of the 3rd, even before the rain delay came. So not great for the Orioles. Now, at the very least, we were trying to figure out, are the O's going to go to a 6-man rotation? They've got 6 good starters. Cole Irvin is right there to just take John Means' spot in the rotation if he does have to go back on the IL. You don't have to worry about depth right now. You still also have Albert Suarez on this roster too, but it just shows you can never have enough starting pitching depth, and it's also hard to really rely on 2 guys in Means and Bradish who are coming off of elbow injuries, and it's just another tough break for John Means. I mean, you feel for the guy. Hopefully it's light. Even if he goes on the IL, hopefully it's just a couple of weeks and he comes back. But obviously we'll get you all the updates you need from that. Second thing you need to know from the loss on Wednesday is that Cole Irvin came in behind him after the rain delay was over and just wasn't his sharpest. Now, it did turn out to be a good thing that the Orioles did not use Irvin in the conclusion of the first game like I thought and kind of wanted them to do. And you have to think that Brandon Hyde probably saw the radar, saw that there could be storms coming through, saw that there could be another rain delay, that they could lose their starter early in the game because of a lengthy rain delay. That's exactly what happened. It turned out to be, at least in theory, great that the Orioles had Cole Irvin to send out there to begin the fourth inning. And at first he was looking good. He did give up a leadoff double, but got through a scoreless fourth. Then with 2 outs in the fifth, he gave up a double and a single. It made it a 3-1 game. And the sixth inning happened. We'll get to that. He got out in the seventh, gave up another home run. Overall, wasn't great out of the Oriole bullpen. Cole Irvin, I mean, he had some swing and miss stuff. He was pounding the zone. His changeup was pretty good, but overall wasn't his sharpest. Just didn't have a put-away pitch. Ended up going 3 1/3 in relief, 5 runs, 3 earned on 6 hits, 2 Ks, no walks, and a home run. 5 hard hit balls by the Cardinals against him. Rest of the O's bullpen did a nice job of keeping it at 5 runs. Albert Suarez got the final 2 outs of that 7th inning after Irvin left. And then Nick Vespi, who was up as the 27th man for the kind of abbreviated doubleheader, he threw a scoreless inning, allowed a hit, but got out of it in the 8th to keep it 5-3. So shout out to Vespi, who most likely is going to be optioned back down to Norfolk and now at the conclusion of this game. But yeah, just not the best stuff from Irvin, but you got to think that he'll probably be rejoining the rotation at this point if John Means is still having those issues. But he really did still kind of save the bullpen. I mean, you give him 3 1/3, and Vespi was the extra guy who's going down, so he doesn't really count as a reliever you use. The only reliever you have to use is Albert Suarez to get 2 outs and throw 11 pitches. So it's not like you taxed him very much at all. So at the very least, nice job to kind of save the pen by Cole Irvin. But the third thing you need to know from the Orioles' 5-4 loss on Wednesday is that the defense just did not help out Cole Irvin at all. And I will tell you right now, the bottom of the 6th inning, in which the Cardinals scored 3 runs to take the lead 4-3 over the Orioles, was the worst defensive inning by the Orioles this season. I mean, full stop, it was not pretty. Starts the inning, there's a runner on first and 1 out. The Orioles are leading 3-1. And Cole Irvin gets a ground ball right to Gunnar Henderson. Tailor-made for a double play. We've seen Gunnar do it a million times this year. Pick it up, run to the bag himself, step on second, throw to first, complete the double play, inning over. Orioles up 3-1 going to the 7th. It was rolled right at him. It was perfect. And then an infield that was a little beat up and kind of some rough shape after the back-to-back rain delays. He just boots it. He boots it, and not only does he boot it, but he kicks it away, which, sometimes you boot it a little bit and you can still flip to second and at least get the 1 out. He couldn't recover at all. Both runners are safe, first and second. And then, this is kind of on Cole Irvin. He did allow a shot up the right center field gap to the next batter, Brendan Donovan. And both runs were going to score. They got good jumps. But the throw home from Gunnar Henderson to try and get the second runner was high. James McCann had to catch it up the line. Then James McCann's running towards third, trying to throw out Donovan going from second to third. He throws it down the left field line. Brendan Donovan scores on the air for a little league homer that brings in 3 runs and gives them a 4-3 lead. Just a disastrous inning. And it kind of puts things into perspective like, man, if you're going to lose the sweepless streak, which the Orioles did, I mean, what a way to lose it in that 6th inning with those 2 egregious errors. And the Little League homer was tough to watch, obviously, but the one that hurt way more was Gunnar Henderson because he's been so good this year, obviously offensively, but he's also been amazing defensively at shortstop. Again, we've seen him turn that double play a million times over the last 2 years and just booted it in a big spot. And you can't blame Gunnar Henderson too much because he's been an AL MVP frontrunner so far this year, and just sometimes it happens. It hurts when it happens. It looks ugly when it happens. It certainly was ugly, but yeah, I mean, the Orioles were helped by errors early in this game. Nolan Arenado forgot how to play third base in the 3rd inning, and it helped the Orioles get some runs. But, man, just Gunnar makes that play 99 times out of 100. This was the one time he didn't, and it kind of killed the Orioles on this day. But the fourth thing you need to know from the Orioles' loss is, as I mentioned, the O's offense did look a lot better against their old friend Kyle Gibson, who got the start in this game, only went 4 innings because of the rain delay, but also the Orioles forced him to throw 84 pitches through those 4 innings, got 3 runs against him on 5 hits, 3 strikeouts, and no walks. Now, they only had 4 hard hit balls. It's not like they crushed him, but they put pressure on Irvin in that 3rd inning when they got all 3 runs. Now, were they helped out by, the fact that Nolan Arenado kind of forgot how to play defense, allowing Ramon Arias and James McCann to reach base to start the inning? Yeah, that is certainly a part of this, but the Orioles capitalized. Gunnar Henderson with an RBI single. The runners move up on the throw. Ryan O'Hearn, situational hitting. RBI ground out makes it 2-0. And then Anthony Santander swings at a pitch that was all the way up here and smacks it into left field for another RBI single to make it 3-0 Orioles. They were patient. They kind of spit on a lot of those sweepers, which is Kyle Gibson's best pitch. They didn't chase that pitch out of the zone. They went after pitches in the zone. They didn't do a crazy amount of damage, but they did enough to get a 3-run inning. And it's been a while since the Orioles have had, well, it kind of feels like it's been a while. It hasn't actually been that long, but they haven't had a big inning like that really in this series where they just kind of strung hit after hit after hit together to bring some runs home. And yeah, they were helped out by some shoddy defense. When they scored 3 on Monday, they were certainly helped out by some shoddy defense as well. But I liked what I saw from the Oriole offense against Kyle Gibson in that game on Wednesday. Now, the offense kind of slowed down again in the middle part of the game. And, coming out of the rain delay, they couldn't really get much going at all against John King, who threw 2 scoreless innings, or Kyle Leahy, who tried to give the O's some base runners and they just wouldn't take them. But the fifth and final thing you need to know from this 5-4 loss Wednesday that ended this sweepless streak is that the Orioles almost did it again. They almost had one of those late rallies when it looks like they're about to get swept and they come out with the victory. And I really thought they were going to do it because the Cardinals, one of the drawbacks of using their high leverage guys to close down the earlier win is that you're not going to have those guys pitch twice in one day. So none of them were available. Andrew Kittredge, Jojo Romero, and Ryan Helsley, the top 3 relievers in the Cardinals bullpen who have been all really good this year, were not available. So they go to Leahy, who goes 2 scoreless innings, and then they have to go to Ryan Fernandez to get the save. Now, he's having an okay year in the bullpen, but he's certainly not one of the Cardinals' high leverage guys, and it showed. Austin Hayes rips a single into right field. Brandon Hyde pinch hits with Cedric Mullins. He rolls a base hit into center. Hayes goes to third with nobody out. And you're like, okay, this might happen. First and third, nobody out, down 5-3. They've got a shot here. Hyde pinch hit Kyle Stowers for James McCann. And then it happened. Stowers rips one into right field. It looks like it doesn't quite have home run distance, but it's like this is going to hit off the wall and be a double. And all of a sudden, Lars Nootbaar makes an incredible running, leaping catch at the wall. You're like, that hurts. But you're thinking, okay, Hayes will score on the sac fly. You'll still have the tying run on base. You're still in a good spot. Well, Cedric Mullins, who hasn't hit much and did get himself a single here in this rally, I don't know if he just was taking a chance and saying, look, I'm going to make sure I score if this falls in, or if he just got a terrible view of the ball and thought it was falling in or thought it did fall in. But Cedric Mullins was around second base, and it was an easy relay throw in by the Cardinals to double off Mullins at first. They got the run on the sac fly that made it 5-4, but Mullins was the important run. He gets pulled off, and it just can't happen. Especially when your offense is struggling, you're trying not to get swept. It just can't happen in the ninth inning. Cedric Mullins is a smarter player, is a better player than that. It just simply cannot happen. And it felt like that was just, the chef's kiss perfect way to have the sweepless streak end, to have this crazy multiple rain delay series end is just with that play like that. Bases get cleared. Gunnar Henderson grounds out, and that's your ball game. The sweepless streak is over. It is nice to put it into perspective, though. It's been over 2 years since the Orioles have been swept in a series. They've had some bad streaks, right? They lost 6 out of 7 last June, weren't technically swept, but played bad baseball for a week, and they still won 101 games. It's good to put in perspective that the Orioles are not playing great baseball right now. Just got swept by the Cardinals, but that's after a 5-3 homestand where they didn't lose any of those series, and they're still 29-18 and still have been a great baseball team so far this year. And baseball games are not like football games. A 2-game losing streak in the NFL season equates to a 19-game losing streak in a baseball season. The baseball season is a long grind for 6 months. 3 losses in a row isn't going to flip your team on its head. It's just not. But it's crazy to put in perspective that so many teams, so many times just have stuff like this happen to them throughout a series. Weird rain delays, bad breaks, some weirdly bad defense, bad base running, bounces not going your way. All this stuff comes together in a 3-game series to every team, and they just get swept. Now, the Orioles didn't play well, but also breaks didn't go their way. And it's amazing to think about how for 2 years, that just didn't happen to the Orioles. And even when it did for 2 games, they'd find their way to win a third. And again, they almost did it on Wednesday and found a way to come back and win that game. It just didn't happen. Applauds to the streak, right? It was amazing to go 106 consecutive series without being swept. That is incredible stuff. And Adley coming up was the catalyst of that streak beginning. On the flip side, maybe it'll be nice that, when the Orioles do lose an opener of a series, you're not like, oh my gosh, is this the one where they lose the streak? I don't think the Orioles players were probably thinking about it that much. I don't think it was like a hindrance to the clubhouse at all, but all good things must end. And this streak did end on Wednesday. But lucky for you all, I think, maybe not lucky, depends on how you feel. This podcast is not ending. Even though we've hit a milestone today. This is episode number 1000 of me hosting this podcast. And coming up next to finish off the episode, just want to go through a little perspective in the time I've been the host here at Locked On Orioles. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. What is Prize Picks? Well, it is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. You just pick players and their stats and more or less. So you go to the Major League Baseball season, you look at the games every single night, and you take, let's say tonight in Chicago, let's say it's Grayson Rodriguez, more or less on strikeouts. I think Grayson's going to shove tonight and end this losing streak. I'd take more on strikeouts. Maybe you want to go to the NBA playoffs, game 2 between the Pacers and the Celtics, maybe game 1 in the Western Conference between the Timberwolves and the Mavericks. Maybe you want to say, you know what? Anthony Edwards is going to score a bunch of points. You just take more on his point total. It's that simple, and you can win up to 100 times your money. And the entries, you can get them in like 60 seconds. They make it easy. They make it fun to play. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100 at Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So it's funny, isn't it? I was kind of planning on this being a very celebratory episode, right? My 1000th episode hosting the Locked On Orioles podcast. That is a lot of shows that I have done for this pod. And I was like, this is going to be a cool celebration of the show and what it's become, what it's grown into. And it's going to be one of the most somber episodes that I have posted, because besides the postseason last year, that episode when the Orioles were swept in the ALDS, that was pretty somber. But otherwise, in the regular season, the Orioles have not been swept in a series that had any meaning since I've hosted this podcast, because I took it over in 2020. Yeah, the O's got swept a lot in 2020 and 2021, but like they stunk. And then in 2022, when they started to get good, they weren't getting swept. So I haven't really had a regular season podcast episode like this where they just got swept. And of course, this is episode number 1000. Of course it would be, because why not? But I take pride in the fact that this podcast is here for you to learn about the Orioles, talk about the Orioles, whether they win or lose, whether things are good or bad. And it was a lot of bad at the early on that this podcast has been here. I want to just go through like a little history and what it's meant to me to do 1000 episodes. I mean, I should probably go touch some grass. Like 1000 podcast episodes over the span of 4 years and change. That is a lot of podcasting about the Orioles. Like I've been in love with the Orioles my entire life, grew up, just outside of Baltimore. Now have lived in the city for the past few years. Like I've lived in Maryland my entire life. Gigantic baseball player, played baseball from the age of 4 all the way up through high school, and continue to play as much as I can, whether it's, playing some of you all in slow pitch softball and volo during the weeknights or whatever it may be. Like baseball's been my love. The Orioles have been my love. And I was born in November of 97. So the Orioles 97 season was over before I was born. So I was not alive for a winning Orioles season until 2012. It was a lot of losing that I watched early in my life. Like there was a video of Chad Moeller posted the other day catching a first pitch from Joe Biden at Oriole Park. I was like, yeah, those are some real Chad Moeller moments that I was watching for the Baltimore Orioles. But those teams with Buck and Adam Jones and Matt Wieters and Markakis and Machado, those kind of reignited my fandom even more. And it's been that way since then. And, this podcast wasn't started by me. Justin McGuire, shout out to him, who still runs a podcast, Baseball by the Book, and is an Orioles fan. You might see him on Twitter. This podcast started in 2018, where McGuire hosted a little over 100 episodes of this show in the 2018 and 2019 seasons. Yeah, those were some pretty bad seasons to be talking Orioles baseball as well. But as many of you know who've tuned in, part of a larger Locked On podcast network, pretty much any team you want to follow in the U.S., there's probably a Locked On podcast that covers that team or that league or whatever it may be. And it's been a fantastic network that has grown and grown since I've been here. But I just saw a posting for an opening for a Locked On Orioles host late in 2019. I applied, I interviewed, I got the job. And January 22nd, 2020 was my first episode that I hosted. Yeah, January 22nd, 2020. So just about 4 years and 4 months ago, almost to the date, is when I started hosting this podcast. And I went back and I listened to some of that episode, and not as polished back then as I am sometimes now. It was, a little more of a not a train wreck, but close to it. I was talking about, kind of introducing myself to the show, was talking about the fact that the Orioles were bringing Adley Rutschman to big league camp. I thought that was pretty cool back then. And I was talking about how it was funny that there was one voter who did not vote Derek Jeter into the Hall of Fame, which made him not unanimous when he was first on the ballot. Those were the subjects of my first episode back in January of 2020. And it was kind of tough, right? Like I had to host a show for 6 months without any baseball being played because the pandemic jumped on us shortly after I started hosting. There wasn't baseball till July. There was, of course, a lot else going on in the world as well. And then I had the 2020 season, which was honestly kind of exciting because the Orioles probably played better baseball than we thought. But then there was the slog that was 2021. I was podcasting all throughout the 19-game losing streak in the 2021 season. That wasn't fun. But then 2022 happened and Adley got called up and the Orioles started to gain some steam and the podcast started to pick up some steam. And then we had last year, like podcasting 5 days a week for a 100-win team that won the division. Like that was so much fun to just be in this Orioles community last year. And it's continued to be fun. Yeah, the Orioles have lost 3 in a row and their sweepless streak is over, but like they're a playoff team right now. They're a World Series contender right now. They got a Cy Young candidate and they've got a Rookie of the Year candidate. They've got an MVP candidate, maybe multiple of them on this team. Like it is a fun time to be an Orioles fan and the future still looks bright. And there were some times during 2021, even during 2022, where I thought about giving up this podcast. I've talked about it a little bit. I do work elsewhere, a full-time 9-to-5 job along with hosting this show. And it can be a lot sometimes. And when the Orioles were still struggling, I'd been hosting it for 2+ years. I was just like, I don't know if I want to continue doing this. Had the 2022 Orioles not played that way, I might have given it up. Heck, if the 2023 Orioles had not played the way they did, I might have given up this podcast. But we move on. I've found a way in my schedule to kind of make it work. And I hope I'm putting out a good product for you all. I think I am. It's been fantastic to see the show grow, to see, how many people have found the show, whether it's via audio, whether it's via the YouTube page. That's been not super new, but that was kind of before the 2022 season. We got to YouTube as well. So we've been there for a couple of years, and we know that's brought in a lot more viewers as well. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to the show here on YouTube, and also leave a 5-star rating and a review wherever you listen. But it's been fantastic. It's kind of truly a labor of love to host this podcast. I mean, I got to thank all of you, the listeners, whether you're the everydayers who are there 5 days a week, whether you are just popping in every so often, whether you just found the show recently, because it's been such a good Orioles team. Like, I cannot thank you enough for helping to grow this show and making it worth my while, really, to continue hosting this show. I mean, it's so much fun, but if nobody was listening, I probably would have given it up a while ago. So it's amazing that there's been so much of a community that comes to this podcast. I mean, I got to thank all the guests that have been on over the years. I had less and less guests on as the team got better because I just wanted to talk about the games more. Back in 2021, I didn't want to talk about the game the night before. I'd briefly talk about it and then I'd get into a bunch of other topics and have a lot of guests on. But from all the writers who have been on, multiple times, from John Mioli and Nathan Ruiz and Danielle Allentuck and Zach Silver and Andy Koska, Paul Mancano, Brennan Mortensen, many, many more who have come on this podcast multiple times. A lot of the kind of Orioles podcast community who's come on this show, Dylan Atkinson and Blake, just to name a few who have been on the show multiple times. The guys from Orioles on the Verge, Bob and Nick and Zach, who have come on plenty of times, that had me on their show plenty of times. You've all been like amazing supporters and also amazing guests to come help me produce this podcast over 4+ years and produce this podcast for 1,000 episodes. That's the other thing. Not only am I recording, I'm editing and uploading and producing all at the same time on this show. And again, a labor of love through 1,000 episodes. And I guess the last big person I got to thank is my beautiful and lovely fiance, Hannah, who kind of puts up with me recording this podcast in our home 5 days a week, right? A lot of the time the Orioles play a game. It ends around 9:30. I'm going up to record and I'm kind of up working later sometimes to get this podcast out. And Hannah has been amazing and supportive to kind of just continue to support me as I chase this labor of love and continue to grow this. And that's kind of the other reason why this week has been exciting for me. One of the reasons why I'm in much more of a chipper mood than you might expect after the Orioles are swept for the first time in 2 years and by a team that's not very good in the St. Louis Cardinals, is that not only did I reach 1,000 episodes, which is awesome, but I'm getting married this weekend. So not a lot to be upset about with the Orioles in that part of my life when I am going to get married this Sunday. Because of that, there will be an episode tomorrow. May not have an episode for the first few days of next week. Listen, I hope you understand. I'm getting married. I'm going to take some time off from the podcast. So this whole White Sox series coming up this weekend, not a lot of it's going to be recapped. Maybe I'll come back at some point mid next week during the Red Sox series. But if you don't hear from me early next week on the pod, you'll know why. Going to be a fun weekend for me. And I'm getting married this weekend. Even if the Orioles start losing to the White Sox, the O's can't hurt me because it's going to be a good weekend. And just thank you all again for all the amazing support through 1,000 episodes. Episode number 1001. I will be back tomorrow. Got the start of a 4-game set tonight in Chicago. The White Sox, they're really bad. 15-34. Perfect team to kind of turn things around against for the Orioles. Grayson Rodriguez going for the O's. And Mike Clevenger, who no one should like as a pitcher or a person, going for the White Sox. The O's, they're going to beat him up and end the losing streak in tonight's game. And I'll be back tomorrow to recap game 1 between the O's and the Sox. But until then, thank you so much for your support. Here's to, hopefully, maybe, potentially, another 1,000 episodes of me hosting this podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow for 1,001 and kind of starting that streak, trying to get to 2,000. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.